Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on how to manage and improve your cash flow. The webinar this afternoon is about understanding how to manage and improve your cash flow, because that could lead to a more stable business model, making it possible to pay suppliers and other expenses on time. The webinar is hosted by Business Gateway, and we have a panel of industry experts this afternoon to join us to help us with the discussion. And it's going to hopefully offer small businesses in Scotland tools and advice to empower them to take ownership of their cash flow. So we'll get into that in a wee moment. A wee bit of housekeeping as we allow other folk to get in. It takes a few moments to get into the webinar, so give folks a wee chance to get in. This is being recorded and it will be made available afterwards for folks who are able to make the session. Everyone's been placed on mute to avoid background noise. And you can submit questions via the wee portal on the side, so please do so. We will try and get to all those questions, but if we don't and there's anything not covered, we will follow up with those afterwards. And also you can contact the Business Gateway directly, of course. So joining me this afternoon, I have Liz Barclay, who's the Small Business Commissioner in the Office of the Small Business Commissioner. I also have Colin Borland, who is with Federation of Small Businesses Scotland, and Susan Love, who is in the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants in Scotland. So I'm going to give them the opportunity just to introduce themselves and say a wee bit about their business and their organisation and what they do. Liz, can I start with you?
You can, certainly, Hugh, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me along. The Office of the Small Business Commissioner was set up with the purpose of helping small businesses with fewer than 50 employees to resolve payment disputes with their bigger customers. So if you are in the middle of a payment dispute and you haven't been paid when you thought you should have been, or if an invoice is overdue, then please do come and talk to us and we'll do what we can to help you. But one of our prime objectives is to make sure we don't in any way damage the working relationship that you have with your bigger customer, because we are fully aware of the fact that small businesses, and I've been a small business all my working life until now, that small businesses first and foremost do not want to damage that working relationship for fear of losing future work and future contracts. And so we're very, very cognizant of that. But we do realise that if you don't get paid, particularly with the current situation where the cost of doing business is going through the roof, then you cannot take the next steps to protect your business, to plan, to grow, to innovate, to invest, etc. So we really need to get you paid as fast as possible for the job that you're doing.
Grant, thanks for that, Liz. Colin, can I turn to yourself?
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Colin Borland. I'm Director of Devolved Nations at the Federation of Small Businesses. We represent small business owners and the self-employed across the UK, and we have done so for nearly 50 years now. We offer members a wide range of practical services, from legal support to tax protection and, of course, debt recovery, while making the small business case to government. And late payments is something which we have been campaigning literally for decades. Late payments result in, across the UK, 50,000 business closures each year, and it always gets worse in an economic downturn. Our figures out just last week show that over half of Scottish small businesses were paid late in the last quarter, and over a quarter of them saw late payments get worse. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to talk to you about some of the solutions and how we might actually practically get around this absolutely disgraceful practice.
Smashing, thanks, Colin. And last but not least, and can I say an old friend and colleague, Susan? You're not shouting at me for that. Susan used to be Federation of Small Businesses, but has moved on to ACCA. So, Susan.
Thanks, Hugh. Hi, everybody. So I am here representing ACCA, which is the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. So what we do is we train and regulate the accountants and finance professionals who work in all parts of the economy. So that might be accountants that work with you as small businesses who are practitioners. It also might be accountants who work in SMEs as part of a finance team for larger SMEs, but it also will be the finance team who work in the large businesses. So somewhat the heroes and the villains of the piece today. And while I'm not an accountant myself, what I have done for today is speak to a range of accountants working in Scotland who are working with SMEs to get their top advice for you on what they see going wrong and some of the top tips that they would really urge small businesses to put in place to help to manage your cash flow and deal with late payment.
Smashing, thanks Susan. And I'm Hugh Lightbody, I'm Chief Officer for the Business Gateway National Unit in COSLA, and I'll be your host this afternoon. This is obviously the 30th of January, although it feels like day 147 in January. Seems to be one of the longest months I've ever encountered, but hopefully our discussion this afternoon will be quite lively and it'll give you some really useful pointers and ideas about how to make your cash flow a bit better. So to get the discussion going, as I say, remember you can put questions into the portal as well. Let's get the discussion going though. Firstly, really, could you, Liz, explain to us why positive cash flow is so important for small businesses? We hear, you know, all the old mantra, cash is king. So why is a positive cash flow so important for small businesses?
I think it's cash flow is king, really, Hugh, isn't it? And let me give you an example. I've got a colleague that we work with who works for the British Chambers of Commerce as well as running his own small business. And he told me last year that he had been paid on average in 66 days. Now, this isn't just about late payments as in overdue invoices, but it's about being offered longer payment terms. So on average, he got paid in 66 days in his company. And so he said to me, I could manage fine. I knew I was going to be able to pay my wages, pay my bills, pay myself a salary if the payments came in on that average. He said, I then got offered a really exciting piece of work, and anybody on the call who runs their own small business, a bit like me, will know that if you get that exciting piece of work, your left hand of your brain says, yes, that's brilliant, it's a game changer, this is going to be terrific, I'm going to take it at all costs. And the right hand of your brain is the bit that should kick in and say, hang on a minute, when are you going to get paid? Because if you're not going to get paid, this is a hobby. So James said to me, he got offered one of these life-changing, game-changing pieces of work, but when he asked that question, they said, we'll pay you in 120 days. And James went back and had a look at his cash situation and realised he'd have run out of cash. So if he had taken that piece of work, in order for him to deliver it, this is the time it would take, what he'd have to pay out, etc. And he realised that he would have run out of cash before he got that payment to come in. He said to the company, I really want to do the work. They said, we really want to work with you, so that's great. He said, but I can't wait 120 days to be paid. They said, when do you need to be paid? He said 30. They said, you know, nobody has ever asked us that before. And this is a key thing, and I'm sure Colin and Susan will have come across this too with small businesses. Sometimes we don't ask for what we need because we don't quite know the question to ask, and also we're scared to push back. They went away and checked, and they came back and said, you know, our processes won't let us pay you in 30 days. Because the approvals process takes this length of time, the payments process, etc. We can pay you in 45 days. And James says that worked for him because he checked, he was going to be able to pay everything, and it worked, and it was a game changer. And so he didn't walk away from that piece of work. But he said sometimes if you can't get the company to pay you faster, it really is better for you to walk away and look for something that will pay you sooner. Otherwise, you could go to the wall. And I think that illustrates why it's so important. And just as a side issue to that, because he had the confidence to do that once, he has talked to other of his customers, and now he gets paid in average 33 days. So that is much better all round, because he has a much better control on his payments coming in, on his cash flow, and he knows what, he has the certainty. And I think for small businesses, it's certainty that they can invest because they will have the money in the bank, in, you know, in training, in recruitment, in upskilling, whatever it happens to be. But without that certainty, small businesses won't spend the money.
Which also helps to confirm the old adage, if you don't ask, you don't get. So negotiate, people. Always a useful thing to do. Colin, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, other than, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not a lack of profitability that kills businesses, it's a lack of cash. That's why they're running out, and we can see the numbers for ourselves. As soon as times get tough, you see large suppliers wanting to use small businesses as, you know, basically a free overdraft. And it's absolutely marvellous. And there's probably more positive conversations than you would think out there, you know, from what Liz is saying, but they are predicated on the buyer having a sort of semblance of decency and actually wanting to engage. Most people in business do behave like that, but again, if you come up against those big hard-nosed corporates who are telling you it's a standard form contract or nothing else, the only choice you've got is take it or leave it.
Thanks, Colin. Just can expand on that a wee bit, Liz. I mean, you've explained there why it's important to have that positive cash flow. What impact can a late payment, and you've kind of started to get into that, and extended terms have on small businesses? You've kind of touched on it there. Can you expand a wee bit on that?
Well, I think if we're talking about late, as in you were expecting the money to arrive in your bank account on the 31st of December, and you're now on the 30th of January, and you don't know when the money is going to come in. I think the big problem is lying awake at night, worrying about how, you know, I've only got so much left in the bank, and I've got this to pay, and how am I going to do it? And we are definitely seeing a big uptick in mental health problems caused by small business owners thinking about them, their own families, about any employees they have in their families, thinking about, you know, the communities that they work in, because small businesses are really rooted in their local communities. And we are seeing a huge, I was talking to somebody this morning who's about to launch a project around about mental health issues for people running their own small businesses in an attempt to help them. And some of the figures that he showed me, unfortunately, I haven't got slides yet, but some of the figures he showed me were horrendous. You know, you are talking about well over half of small business owners saying they're affected by mental health problems brought on by the fact that there are lots of stresses. But part of that is about being paid late. But I think it's worth pointing out that, you know, a lot of these big corporates are, there's a lot of people working in them who've never run a small business. They've never been freelance. They've never been sole trader. They've never worked for a micro business. And so they do not know. And how could we expect them to know that £600 paid a week late could be enough to push a small business to the wall? And so I think there needs to be an awful lot more communication between customers and their suppliers and vice versa as to who am I and what does this actually mean for me if you pay me late? And so that uncertainty causes all sorts of angst and anxiety, but it could push small businesses and is beginning to push small businesses to the wall. And as Colin says, we can't afford to have big businesses using smaller businesses as their bank so that they can do something else with their business. That's just not acceptable. But as a bigger customer, bear in mind, if that supplier's not there the next time you need them, you haven't got anything to sell on to your customers. And it's getting harder and harder to find that talent out there. You know, you really need to hang on to good suppliers when you've got them and support them to stay viable.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting there. You're talking about someone getting into that whole issue of mental health and supporting, which is, I mean, that's fantastic. I'm delighted to hear that, because I think one of the things certainly the Business Gateway service has seen over the last 2-3 years is an increased need to be very aware of how business owners and people's mental health has been affected by things like the pandemic, and again, most recently, the whole crisis that we're in as well. And I think it would be really interesting if whoever's doing that had some kind of trend data to be able to see what was the situation before these kind of things happened, what's the situation now, how much of an additional impact have these things had on people's lives. Really interesting. Really
well,
interesting.
I will put them in touch with you, Hugh, because these are really important issues. But, I just don't think we know enough about it. But the other thing is, running a small business is very isolating. Quite often people need to hear from their peers rather than from, a government support group or whatever. They really need to hear about other people who are willing to help them and kind enough to help them about what it's really like on the ground. But also, I think the pandemic has made it even more isolating for a lot of people. And we've kind of got out of the way of connecting and meeting up with people, so we haven't got as much of that safety net, and we have to try to rebuild that too.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things that we made sure that we were addressing on as content on the Business Gateway website, and in terms of folks' mental health and well-being, just considering that. No, it's really helpful. Colin, can I come to you, that in the unfortunate case that a business is dealing or having to deal with a late payment issue, what would you say is the first thing they can do to resolve that?
Yeah, really, really good point. I mean, I think the first thing is make sure you do have a sort of clear policy in place for dealing with overdue payments. So things like following up non-payment with a friendly letter or email or phone call, just gently reminding clients about the payment terms and the contract that they've signed. Applying interest to encourage prompt payments, advising your clients that you'll be pausing all future work until invoices get paid. And sometimes clear communication is all it takes to settle an invoice, which is why things like late payment letters are so important to the debt recovery process. So, your late payment letter to the customer, I suppose, is the first step. Remind them that payment's due, request that they pay as soon as possible. If that doesn't work, you move on to a late payment demand, which lets you claim interest and compensation in addition to the principal sum. If a late payment demand has been sent and the debtor still fails to pay, then that's when you get into the letter before action, which is sort of the first step in the legal process, and that effectively warns the late payer that if they don't pay, then you'll be willing to take action. So that's really like a final deadline at which to make payment and provide certain other information that the court expects to be provided. And this is the point where we start sailing into sort of legal waters and all that entails. So it's one of those things, particularly if you are an FSP member, get on our legal hub, download the free template letters because they're all sort of pre-action protocol compliant, and that make sure you stay the right side of the law when you're pursuing that debt.
And to mitigate beforehand, what kind of things can businesses do to mitigate getting into that situation?
Well, I suppose it depends on knowing who you're doing business with, and I think that really gets to the heart of the question, because it's that old sort of 80-20 rule. That 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers, and if one of those 20% decides to start, as we said before, using you like a free overdraft, it does put you in a difficult position. If that big customer is regularly placing £1,000 worth of orders a month but hasn't paid you since July, you need that money, but you don't want to destroy the relationship. So, with the obvious caveats that it depends who you're dealing with, I think it is time you have a sensible, conversation about how you need to be paid. Because as Liz was saying, if you're an important supplier, it's hardly in the buyer's interest to see you go under due to those cash flow difficulties. And you can also have a general look, but it's a good idea to keep your payment terms under review anyway. See if you can shorten them, from 13 to 14, include due upon receipt on the invoice instead of payment due within X days. Indeed, in some industries, if it's practical, you might ask for some payment of the work up front, because people understand that you need to buy materials, whatever, or if important. And you might even want to have different terms for those who are new customers and you're not quite sure what their payment practices are going to be like, versus those with whom you have a long-standing, trusting relationship.
Okay, that's grand. Colin, Liz, I'm not sure whether you were waving your pen at me or you're wanting to come in.
I was frantically going, Hugh. No, I just want very quickly to say, before you do take the step towards legal action, contact us, because if we can help you resolve it without legal action, that's great. But once you've started legal action, we can't get involved. So come and talk to us first, just before you take that final step.
Excellent. That's really sound advice. Thanks for that, Liz. Okay. How important? I'm gonna come to Susan. I'm conscious you're very quiet there, Susan, so I'm going to get you involved in this. How important is it for suppliers to negotiate and secure fair payment terms?
Yeah, so as we discussed already, cash flow really is the difference between success and failure for businesses. I think Colin mentioned this at the start, that we tend to talk to businesses about the importance of profitability as against turnover, but actually more businesses fail because they run out of cash, irrespective of how full the order book is or how profitable the business is. And this can be particularly important for small businesses, because it's not that cash flow isn't important for all sizes of business. It's just that many of the ways you might overcome that in a large business are harder for small businesses to deal with. So accessing finance in a short space of time, for example, much harder for smaller businesses to do. I guess that quite a lot of why it's important to think about payment terms, why are they so critical? Why are they not just a given part that you accept as part of doing business, comes back to sort of cornerstones of business finance. So the certainty and planning of your finances is really a sort of a key point in terms of your financial management. So what the terms give you, if you agree them, as far as possible, is an element of certainty about what you're going to get paid and when, and therefore how much cash you need to get through the process. Now, we spoke to our members, only about a fifth of our members who work with SME clients said that their SME clients used and updated cash flow projections on a rolling basis. So I know this is easier said than done, but I'm going to pass on the advice about how important this financial planning is and how payment terms fit into that. So in essence, your payment terms are key to understanding what's coming in, what's going out, and how you're going to finance that. And a key piece of advice that comes forward from accountants who spend quite a lot of time dealing with supporting small businesses who are going through all the distress of what happens when this goes wrong, when you're trying to unpick what's been agreed and when, is really to spend as much time thinking about how you're going to fulfill an order or a contract and the impact that has on your cash flow. So maybe that's about buying in stock or paying extra staff wages. Spend as much time on thinking about that as you would about winning the business in the first place. Now, I know it's more complicated than that. If you think about a supply chain, think about it like you would a concertina. So it comes in or out, there's stresses and strains at all different parts of that supply chain, and there's lots of dependencies there. And of course, if it goes wrong at one part, the whole thing can collapse. And it looks different according to what your sector is. If you're a business-to-business customer, if you're a business-to-consumer business, of course it looks different. But what we're aiming for is agreeing and aligning payment terms as much as possible throughout that supply chains, because it helps to de-risk the whole process of what you're going to get paid and when. But really, in simple terms, agreeing those payment terms prevents a huge amount of stress and time later on, and it's always better to try and have those terms agreed between parties rather than it being imposed by one party. So as I said, I know it's a lot more complicated in practice, and each business's circumstances are different depending on who your customers are. But I think we'll probably come on to talk about some more of the steps that you can take to help you agree to those payment terms and think about how you're going to manage them.
Thanks, Susan. And Colin, and kind of building on that, thinking about what you were saying, Colin, about that, the communication between you as a business and with your customer, or indeed with your suppliers for that matter, because the payment terms works at both ends of that. As Susan's saying there, there's a supply chain. So you have payment terms with your customers, you have payment terms with your suppliers. And it's about that communication, it's about relationship, it's about being able to negotiate those terms. Is that a skill that people can learn, can be trained in, can get from somewhere? Where can people get those kind of skills for doing that negotiation? Who can do that for them or can help them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's one of the things, I mean, there's actually some really good top tips on Lizzie's website, the Small Business Commissioner, just about, and I think the sort of the common theme that runs through that is just to be able to get, I think, a better handle on your genuine worth to the other side. Because we all go into deals kind of pretending we don't really want it, and we're doing you a favour by buying it, but we actually know what we really want. You know, is that product that you provide? So I think, you know, there's good advice there. What I would say is that this all comes down to the relative bargaining position. And I mean, the current energy crisis is a good way of looking at that. You know, your typical small business is not in a position where they're going to negotiate with a massive multinational who's utility company that's supplying them. And sometimes, if that is the nature of the relationship, there is limited room for manoeuvre. So you're just going to have to accept, are we going to accept that or not? That said, if people do start breaching their contracts and do so, then again, that's when, you know, you can pursue it yourself, or you can speak to the Small Business Commissioner, or look at other routes. So I think, yes, with that obvious, that practical caveat, that, you know, this wouldn't have been an issue for 30 or 40 years, you know, if there was a simple answer to it, you know. With that obvious caveat, then yes, I think having that confidence in your own worth, and knowing that, and particularly for small businesses, because small businesses do stuff that other people just can't. You know, they can provide levels of personal service that other people just can't, or its products, or its innovation, or its the ability to pivot like that if you need to. And bear that in mind when you're having the discussion. Most people are decent, some aren't, and if they're not, then that's when you've got a tough choice to make.
Yeah. So that ability as a small business to be nimble and agile in the marketplace, you know. Liz, anything you want to add to that?
Hugh, that is a talent, Hugh. That is a real talent, that agility. Don't undersell it. You know, you are the talent that is driving your bigger customers' success. And when it comes back to what Colin says, know your worth. And that's really difficult. And I think sometimes as a small business, we think ourselves as being too small in the whole scheme of things. But, you know, there are big corporates out there at the moment that aren't willing to take on people full time, and they're looking to freelancers to fill the gap. They're looking to sole traders, they're looking to micro businesses. So, you know, you are vastly important, even if you're at the bottom of that supply chain. If you're not there, the whole supply chain is going to collapse, and it's harder and harder at the moment. We lost something like 750,000 small freelancers from the freelance sector during the pandemic. Well, that means that freelancers are beginning to get paid in some sectors much more than they were because they're in short supply. But that's because they're really talented, agile people who can turn things around much more quickly and can innovate. So we've got to really, as Colin says, think about what our worth is. Sorry, I cut across you. We're going to ask me a different question, but I just feel really passionately about this talent issue. You know, yeah. And I have a small business said to me the other day on a panel session, but I can't negotiate. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I'm not allowed to legally. So small businesses even think that they have to legally accept the terms that they're offered, and they don't. You know, you can negotiate. And I know it's not an easy skill to pick up, but actually, if you have got a good mentor, talk to them. If you've got somebody you know who's run a business for a while, talk to them. This is why I think some of the skills come through peer-to-peer, you know, help and support and mentoring.
Hugh, I'm just going to, very quickly, I know I'm going to move on, but I just echo that. I mean, I know it doesn't feel that way. I know that most of the problems are caused by businesses being inflexible and refusing to negotiate with some small businesses or imposing terms, but every accountant I spoke to said to me, you can ask for standard terms to be changed. It doesn't mean they will be, but you can and you should ask, because after all, businesses want to do business with each other for a reason, and so sometimes you can find a way.
And it's a fair guide as to what they like to do business with anyway. I mean, again, I won't name the company, but there's a large multinational petrochemical company, I know we have a member who has done some work for them, still not been paid, and they will tell you things like, yes, I'm afraid that our accounts department only opens to answer queries between 2 and 4 on a Tuesday. Now, you're a global petrochemical company, that's obviously nonsense, but that's the way, that's the way they're behaving. So people aren't ready to have a chat, a lot to say, no, sorry, computer says no, or to say that we're not willing to enter any discussions, or our systems won't let us do this, as you were talking about earlier. Then that's a pretty good indication of what they're going to be like to deal with, should you take that work on. So at least you're going in with your eyes open.
No, really helpful. Thanks for that, Colin. Just to remind folk out there, please, if you have a question, to fire into the portal. And I'm going to respond to one of the questions we've had, which was asking, before you come to a situation of legal action for chasing payment, where do we suggest that you come to first? Now, when we were talking about that earlier, Liz, you were saying before you get into the legal bit, come to the Office of the Small Business Commissioner. So there's no restraint to that. Anybody can come to you and raise that issue.
Yep, and it's free. The service is free. You're not paying for us to help you out. Now, we had a case a couple of weeks ago where we got somebody who phoned us and said, can you help with this? But they'd already appointed solicitors, and so we couldn't get involved. But we knew from the detail that they had given us that we could have picked up the phone and would probably have been able to get that payment through really quickly. So we could have saved the solicitor's fees, we could have saved the court fees, all the rest of it. So just come and have a chat with one of the caseworkers. They're really friendly, and we'll do everything we possibly can to help. And as I've said before, we'll do our best to make sure that we don't do anything to damage your working relationship, if at all possible. And it's possible that we may even just be able to give you the information that you need in order to resolve it yourself. Because quite often firms say to us, I won't give you my name, I won't tell you who my big customer is who's not paying me, but then they phone back and say, I told my customer that we'd phoned your office and they've paid me straight away. So sometimes it kind of works like that. We have a joke in the office that we should just get a cardboard cutout of the Small Business Commissioner and it might help, but we do know. And also you can charge interest on payments that are overdue. And we have got a brand new interest rate calculator that's just going on our website today as we speak. So again, that might give you a bit of leverage, because you're saying, I know I can charge interest and I know the interest would be this, and I will invoice for that. And sometimes that gets the payment flowing too.
Excellent. So you heard it here first, folks. There's an interest rate calculator going up on the OSBC website, so you'll be able to follow that. And again, you've met Liz today. They're not scary people. Approach them. Do it before you get into the legal situation, because they're there to help. So they're really good advice on that. Someone else has put in, not a question, but a comment, but a really valuable comment, that sometimes that late payment can also be a sign that the customer is perhaps in financial difficulty themselves. So talk, communicate, speak to people, but important from a negotiating point of view, empathy, because obviously they could be in a situation as well. So be alert to that. Well, that's been really helpful. Thanks for that. I said, again, just to say, if you have any questions, folks, fire them in. So let's move on in our discussion. Colin kind of trailed this earlier on there. He made the point on the OSBC website of some really good tips there for you to follow. So in terms of what other top tips you might have to consider when negotiating terms with a customer, is there anything small businesses can put in place easily? Come to Colin first on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think really, to recap the discussion we've already had, make sure you're speaking to them, make sure you understand the position you're in, get as much information as you possibly can. You might, if it's a new customer, maybe want to do some sort of credit check just to see how they do it. Unfortunately, looking up some of the information that is publicly available through Companies House, for example, isn't particularly reliable. And I think there's stuff we could do there to certainly improve that sort of reporting reporting questions. But again, you know, I think just to be reasonable with people, explain what your circumstances are. And that fact of saying, look, I would love to do this job, but I can't do it if I'm not going to see the money until the summer. You know, and it's as simple as that. This is not. I'm not taking a moral decision. I'm not taking a business decision. I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you the facts. And if you have relatively, you know, equal bargaining power, if it's somebody who's willing to have a discussion with you, I think that's fine. If people don't want to talk to you, it's a different conversation. And all of this continually, you know, comes back to that.
Grand. Thanks for that, Colin. Liz?
Well, I would say, if you haven't worked with somebody before, and given what Colin has said, you know, do your credit checks and so on, have a look at BEIS's, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy has reporting data that's publicly available. Have a look at that. Look to see if they're signed up to the prompt payment code. Check out the credit reference agencies, etc. Have a look and see how much information that you can gather about the company you're proposing to work for. Because if they don't make payments fairly, they're probably not treating their employees fairly either. And do you really want to work with them is the first question. But ask all the questions before you sign up. You know, it's not just about negotiating the contract, but it's about thinking, I need it in writing so that we can prove that actually we've had this conversation and these terms were agreed to. If they say they're going to pay you in 30 days, what does that mean? Because 30 days doesn't mean 30 days after the date you put on the invoice. It could mean 30 days after they receive it, 30 days after they approve it, 30 days from the end of the following month, 30 days from the point at which the payment department receives it. So, you know, your 30 could grow into 60 something if you're not careful. So you really need to know, when is it going to hit the bank account? You want to contact. Now, the person who's given you the job is usually not the person who's going to pay you. Maybe in a small company it would be, but in a medium-sized company or a bigger company, it is not going to be the same person. And I have fallen foul of this many times, get terribly excited. I know this person, they've given me this piece of work, and then when it comes to getting paid, I have no idea who to contact. Well, the person who's given me the work has moved on to commissioning other work and procuring other work somewhere else. So who is going to be the person? Who's my point of contact? What's their phone number? And try to build a relationship with them. What you really want is to be the person who gets paid on a Friday afternoon before they go off for the weekend. You know, even if they're, you know, they know that they're going to have to leave some of the payments till Monday morning, you want to be the one who gets paid. And you know, we are sometimes guilty, and again, something else that I have done, of trying to make ourselves look bigger than we are. You know, we pretend we even though we're not going to reach the VAT threshold, we want to be VAT registered, we're a limited company, even though there's only one of us, all of that kind of thing. So we look a bit bigger. So the payment department goes, oh, well, they're a fairly big company, they can wait till Monday, when actually you need paid on Friday. So there's something to be said for being open and honest about, you know, you as a company, finding out as much as you can about them as a company and trying to build that relationship.
And of course, when you're talking there, I'm thinking, yeah, 30 days, is that working days or calendar days?
Could be, it could add up to 90 days in total if you're not really careful, you know, because if you're putting in your invoice on the 1st of, you know, not tomorrow, but Wednesday, and then you have to wait 30 days from the end of February, well, there you are into 59 days already. And then if it's late on top of that, you know, chances are you've run out of cash.
Yeah. We touched there on your interest rate calculator, and the questions come in. Is it a flat rate of interest you can charge on the outstanding amount? And does this have to be stated on the initial invoice requesting payment? Now, I suspect if you're going to have a clause like that, that's a contractual clause. So you would have stated that in the contract in terms of the work that you'd be doing. Flat rate of interest, well, that would depend again on the terms that you were putting in. That you could agree that anything late payment would be charged at a, you know, 4%, 5%, whatever it was you were going to do. And potentially, if it then is another month, you could maybe have a different rate and so on. But so I think it's horses for courses. That's what you agree.
Well, yes, if there's a contract, Hugh, but if there isn't a contract, then you are still entitled if your if your invoice is overdue, the date at which it was due to be paid. So it's outside contractual terms, etc. And the interest rate calculator shows how much interest has been charged for how many days, etc. Because I think it's the interest rates on the 1st of January and the interest rates the 1st of June that count. And then it's the statutory percentage on top of that. But the calculator, this new one, our older one wasn't quite so efficient, but our new one does all that calculation for you. So you simply put in the date at which the invoice was due, how many days it's over, etc. And it does the calculation and it shows that whole calculation for you so that you can then set all of that out in your invoice if you want to do so. But you are right, of course, if you're signing away your rights to a certain extent if you accept, though, that you'll be charged at a flat rate of interest if it's overdue, because you have got rights to charge at the statutory rate and under the statutory regulations.
Grand, thanks for that. A question's also come in. Where can I find a rolling Excel cash flow template? Anybody know whether there's some decent Excel templates out there that can do cash flow?
Well, I could maybe allude to that, Hugh, if I go over some of the top tips. I'm sure Colin and Liz might have some advice on that as well. So one of the things that I was thinking about that came up most often in relation to how do you deal with a late payment. So it's happened to you, your due payment. What are some of the things you should do? I know this sounds preachy and pointless after the fact, but one of the top pieces of advice that comes back, you won't be surprised to hear from the finance professionals, is put in place as many steps as you can to stop it happening or minimize it happening as much as you can. So I could run through a few of those bits and pieces of advice for free from finance professionals for you if that would be helpful. And it's going to come back to what I said earlier about this importance of thinking about your cash flow in terms of getting as much certainty built into the process as possible. So a lot of the issues in terms of things that businesses can put in place fall into, I would say, two sort of key areas: planning and relationships. We've touched on both of these to some extent. So the relationships, as others have said, are absolutely critical here. So you need to really fully consider the implications and agreement of your terms before you accept the business and the contract. And as we said, of course, thinking about that in relationships, that will vary. How you go about that might vary depending on who your customer is. So if it's a public body, for example, they have a different way of doing things. They have different statutory terms that they need to work to. And if it's a large business, for example, then they've got large systems and approval processes, as Liz mentioned, which might take a while to go through, but they also might be more willing to compromise on standard terms than you think. But it all takes time. So again, think about those relationships, think about the time. It takes time to go through a large business. It equally takes time if you're dealing with another small business, where it's a small business owner like you who's doing everything themselves and they're really busy. It can take time for them to get through the invoices as well. Of course, there's some really poor behaviour. Of course there is. Colin's rightly pointed that out. But in the majority of cases, businesses and organisations do want to do business with each other, and compromise can sometimes be reached. I think the other key piece of advice about relationships that is worth always thinking about when you're thinking about your terms and how you deal with steps put in place to minimise late payment is think about the process and think about the person on the other side of this transaction. So particularly if you're dealing with a large business, most large businesses use finance purchase to pay type systems that rely on people and computers matching up sets of transactions. They need to match up what they see in front of them with what's in a purchase order and what they've seen come in. And things can start to go wrong when there's any deviations from that. So one of the most common features you'll get is things go wrong in a payment system because the PO number was slightly wrong, or something was written in the wrong format or put in the wrong way. And so those human factors can be really important in terms of thinking through, how does this look on the other side of this? How do I make it as easy as possible to get paid? Another top tip that comes up in terms of getting that purchase order and invoice absolutely correct is thinking about any deviations that arise from an original purchase order. So sometimes the person, as Liz said, the person that you're doing business with, there might have been changes to the original order. Maybe more work or a slight shift of what's been asked for, or a change to timescale. That can all create problems for the finance system. So for example, think about a verbal change in agreement that you made might not show up on the finance system. So maybe thinking about, rather than putting that all into one invoice, thinking about separate POs and invoices might be a way to deal with that. From a planning point of view, thinking about that cash flow planning, as Colin said, especially if it's a new area of business or a new customer, think about what you're going to do, what would help you, what you're going to do if something goes wrong. For example, how you're going to think about accessing working capital. Bear in mind, it's taking, what, 3 to 4 months at the moment to get an overdraft approved, if you get an overdraft approved. Think about whether a professional might be able to help you. You would expect me to say that, but your accountant isn't just for filing your self-assessment return in January. They can help you with various things. One of the most important things they can help you with is advising you on setting up finance and accounting software. So lots of businesses now successfully use all kinds of apps and software to manage that rolling cash flow that the question asked about. There are too many companies to mention, just Google it. But if you're not confident, you don't need to buy an all singing and all dancing system. If you're not confident of setting it up, but you are confident about managing it on an ongoing basis, again, that's something that you can speak to an accountant about, and they can help you set that up. The most important thing that's been sort of hinted at throughout this, and there's no getting away from it, is you have to deal with the stuff that nobody really likes. So the legitimate contracts, putting those in place, so not just verbal agreements, written contracts, is everything crystal clear and agreed by both parties? Have you got sign-off processes? Is it all in paperwork? And then good debt management and credit control processes. I know that some of this sounds obvious, but it's really critically important to think about this in your business and what steps you could take, how software will help you to do this. So the first thing is issuing invoices as swiftly as possible, making sure they've got all the details on them that make it as easy as possible for your client to pay you. So even simple things, I know these sound obvious, but simple things like address and bank account details, all the information that someone sitting on the other side of that finance system who's entering all the details, everything that will help them pay that as fast as possible. Thinking about how digitization can help you. So a lot of the accounting software and apps will automate your invoices and reminders for you. Make sure that all of your terms on that software, if you are already using it, make sure that's all up to date. And then, as Colin mentioned earlier, if you've got different terms for different customers, make sure that's all up to date. Use that to help you with your credit control processes, things like making sure you're recording the dates of when invoices went out, when reminders went out, even through to, one of the things that a lot of accountants mentioned was, where it's possible, and it's not for everyone, but where it's possible, think about how on your website you could have a pay now button. So something that links through to, if you can accept payment through PayPal, for example. If your customer's a large business or organisation and you have to interact with one of those payment systems that we mentioned, take some time at the outset of the contract to go on that system and understand it, get familiar with it. Don't wait until 30 days has passed and then go into the system, because you might find that a problem with your invoice had been thrown up after only a couple of days and now 30 days have gone by. But ultimately, what this all comes back to from a planning perspective is you have to consider at the outset, back to what Liz said at the start, you have to consider whether it's the right customer for you and how you will be able to finance the agreed terms of the contract. I hope that was a sort of helpful run through.
Smashing.
And
Liz.
Hugh, can I just add that a piece of research in 2019 showed that 47% of invoices went in with mistakes on them. And, you know, so what Susan says is so relevant. That's an awful lot. But we also know that about 15% of invoices that are paid late, and some of them will be because there were mistakes on them, are never chased up. And so people lose that money because the small business hasn't got time to chase it. So the more you can do to make yourself payable right at the beginning, the more important it is. And I always say bookkeepers and accountants, so you're absolute saviors in all of this, because they're worth that. They can give you strategic advice as well as just being, you know, doing the paperwork, and they really are worth the weight in gold. And I think small businesses sometimes really are scared that they're going to have to pay so much, but sometimes you can't afford not to pay a good accountant or a bookkeeper to help you through this. But the other thing about the software is if you make a mistake, the AI is going to say no, whereas if a human had been intervening and it had been done by a person, the person might very well have said, oh, look, it's a minor mistake, we'll just pay it and get the invoice sorted later. You know, but as we get more and more digitized and more AI driven, the chances are that some of those computers will throw out your tiny mistake on your invoice. Just go through them and make sure they're absolutely right before you put them in.
That's really helpful. And that's a shocking figure that you quoted there. So advice, clearly, get it right first time, because that's important, really important. Just on thinking about that a wee bit further then, Liz, in terms of, so you've got the details on the paperwork. Are there any other ways that you can improve your customers' awareness of what your desired payment terms are? Or are there other ways of doing it other than, you know, if there's a contract, it's on the contract. If it's an invoice, it's on the invoice. It's, you know, it's there and it's clear.
Yeah.
Any other ways you can do that?
Well, I think that you are quite entitled to state your payment terms rather than wait necessarily for your customer to state their payment terms. You can say, if you want to do business with us, we need to be paid in 30 days from the date on our invoice, or from 30 days when you receive our invoice. You know, so you can get on the front foot and you can ask for, if you're going to have to pay out for materials and so on up front. Colin might be better placed to answer this than me, but you know, you can ask for staged payments. You can say, I really need some money up front because I'm going to have to buy materials, or I'm going to have to buy in some skills. But I sometimes think it's the communication that is the most important thing. The more you are upfront with your customer about who you are and how you work, and the more they're upfront with you, the more chances you have of dovetailing and getting it right between you. So that you pay. And as Susan said earlier, you know, people don't get out of bed in the morning to do a bad job. And I do know that there are some firms out there that are fairly bad at paying, yes, but some of them I know that are signing up to the prompt payment code, which we administer. We don't own it, Bayes owns it, but we administer it. Some of those big companies are spending millions of pounds in getting their processes to the point where they can pay their small suppliers within 30 days. So they're really looking to how to get the payment, because they know, and I think the pandemic kind of concentrated people's minds, they know that they have got to keep their suppliers alive and viable and sustainable. Otherwise, they're not going to be there. They'll have gone to the wall. And it's costly to go out and look for new ones. You know, so there are efforts being made, but not every company is going to get their board to agree to spending a few £1 million on updating their processes. Yeah, you know, so it really is about trying to get that communication, trying to get it negotiated, trying to get it on writing, and then putting that date everywhere, top of the invoice due, and then phoning up a fortnight beforehand and just checking, is it coming? Is it coming? But Colin probably can add to that.
Just Colin, while you're thinking about that and doing that, we're kind of talking earlier there about, you know, tools, Excel templates for cash flow. Are there any particular tools that you would recommend small businesses use to monitor their cash flow?
I wouldn't recommend any specific product, but as Susan was saying, there is an awful lot out there. You know, sometimes it will come as a bolt-on with your accountancy package. You might get all the standalone packages. Some of them are household names, others are relatively bespoke. It's not, trust me, it's not a big job. Get on there, Google it, you know, and you'll find tools that will help you do exactly that. And a lot of them are customizable as well. They can do as much or as little, really, you know, as you want them to do. But Susan's absolutely spot on. The importance of forecasting that cash flow, monitoring all the other factors that come into play, really, really important. But these days, you shouldn't need to sit with the old pencil and paper at the kitchen table of a Sunday evening, trying to work out if you're going to get through to Friday. Although I know from experience that still does happen. The other point I was going to make, I think, yeah, you know, yes, you're right about the need to remove as much human error as possible from the system, and that gets it sliding through. So when you do have people who are acting in good faith, then, you know, you just don't make them work too hard. Just say, you know what it's like yourself. If you're looking at something, I'm trying to sign this off, and where does that match up to? You're already predisposed to not do it. It's the one that goes to the bottom of the pile. So, you know, absolutely get inside their head, give them what, you know, give them what they want. That does presuppose, however, that people are quite keen on getting to pay it within 30 days. And we do have a problem with corporate culture in the UK. In the UK in particular, I'm not entirely sure why, but it does seem to be, you know, the UK seems to be something of an outlier in this one. And again, I remember talking to two finance directors, one who worked for a public sector organisation, the other who worked for a sort of medium-sized to large manufacturer. And they both studied together, they qualified together, and they were talking about how are you getting on and what, you know, how is this, you know, how are you managing to meet this challenge? And one said, oh, no, it's really good. We're paying about 80% of our invoices within 30 days now. And the guy who worked for the large PLC turned around and said, see, if I did that, I'd get sacked. My board would dismiss me. My job as FD is to hang on to as much money as I possibly can for as long as I possibly can. That's my job. Now, that's a problem. You know, that is a problem with corporate culture in the UK, and that's what Liz and her great team are up against. It's what we are up against, and we're trying to recover it. But we can do it. We can do it. And I was just looking at it. We have our own debt recovery service, which we launched back in June. We've now just passed the £2 million mark in terms of funds recovered from members. So it can be done. It isn't hopeless. And yeah, I think as we said today, you have many clubs in the bag when it comes to this.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of time, which is rapidly running out for us. One last wee point, just very quickly around everyone. Recent reports that consumers are returning to cash payments as they look to manage their budgeting more amid the whole cost of living thing. How do you think this will impact SMEs? So very quick thoughts on how it might impact on SMEs. Liz?
Small businesses rather than SMEs, I would say, Hugh, are going to find it more difficult to handle that cash because they've got to get it into the bank and the bank branches are closing. I think that's a security issue that a lot of small businesses are very cognizant of. But yes, think very carefully about how you're going to handle that and whether you're going to have it on the premises. That's got us away from payments, but certainly it is something that small businesses moved away quite a bit from during the pandemic and are now having to grapple with again.
Yeah. Susan, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I think I'm sure this is Colin will add this as well. It swings and roundabouts, isn't it? Because on the one hand, lots of businesses prefer cash transactions for lower value because a card transaction fee wipes out any profit they would make on a small transaction versus exactly what Liz said, that the cost of banking the cash. But let me just add the point you'd expect me to make. It's possible that more small businesses might move to cash deals even from business to business arrangements just because of the increase in costs and inflation. Cash deals might become more attractive. That's fine, just make sure it's all properly recorded.
Absolutely, really sound advice. Now, I'm really conscious that we're heading towards 2 o'clock and that's our time up. Hopefully everyone out there has got some benefit out of today, with some key messages and lessons in there. The Small Business Commissioner is there to help. Speak to them, look at the website. Federation of Small Businesses, again, fantastic resources there for you to talk to. And a key message from ACCA, those professionals are there to support you and help you with your business. And of course, the Business Gateway service is there as well. We do a number of webinars on financial management, cash flow, bookkeeping, those kind of things. So make use of those free resources. Thank you everyone for participating this afternoon. Thank you everyone out there for joining us. Take care and look after yourselves. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.